Chapter 24. Dylan Wycliffe blinked in surprise. Where was Holly? Holly had been there moments earlier, and then she wasn't. How could that be? "Where's Holly?" Laurel asked him. "She was just there. I've never seen anyone move so quickly. It was almost as if she vanished." "She did," growled Dylan, a sense of anger overcoming his usual caution and fear. "And I bet I know why. Should have known he'd never let her go once he got his hooks into her," he muttered angrily. Dylan took a step forward, turning and shouted, "Come out wherever you are, Harry, and bring Holly with you. How dare you take her away like that?" Only the peaceful twittering of birds greeted his call. "Don't be ridiculous," scoffed Laurel. "Harry Potter would never do something like that." "You don't know them like I do," argued Dylan darkly. "They're sneaky when they want to be. They probably never intended to let Holly leave the school. Can you shut up that darn cat?" he added as an afterthought. Holly's cat had started yowling almost the moment Dylan realized Holly had disappeared. It was most annoying, to say the least. "Nonsense," argued Laurel as she walked up to the cat. It was crouched in the grass near where Dylan had last seen Holly. "Why would he have sent us transcripts?" she asked. "If Harry intended for Holly to stay with him, he would have told you up front, so at least we wouldn't worry." Laurel bent down to look at the cat. "Sasha," she began, talking to the cat as if it understood her, "you've got to stop crying. We're trying to find Holly, and we can't think what to do with all that noise you're making." To Dylan's surprise, the cat immediately stopped yowling, but remained crouched in the grass while staring intently at Laurel. Its tail twitched restlessly back and forth in the grass. Laurel bent down, looking at the cat. "Harry!" Dylan shouted out angrily. "When I get my hands on you," he threatened. "Dylan!" called out Laurel as she reached out towards the cat and picked up something. "What?" "Look." And she held out Holly's charm bracelet for Dylan to see. "I found this in the grass." "Holly's never without her charm bracelet," Laurel added while walking back to Dylan. Dylan took the bracelet into his hands and stared at it in disbelief. "How could she have gone and yet leave her charm bracelet behind?" Laurel asked. Dylan frowned. "I don't know," he replied, knowing Laurel was right. This was all horribly odd, even for Harry. "Vernon!" he called out suddenly. "Did you see where Holly went?" There was no answer. Dylan looked over at the tree where he had last seen Vernon, but couldn't see him anywhere. "Vernon!" Dylan called out questioningly. There was no reply. "This isn't funny," Dylan added. "Where are you? Come over here now." There was still no reply. Only birds chirped in answer to his calls. Laurel walked towards the tree and Dylan followed behind. It was the last place they had seen Vernon. "Vernon!" shouted Laurel in a worried voice as they walked. "Where are you?" "He's probably in the car," Dylan suggested positively, and changed his direction to towards the car. "That's why he doesn't answer. He can't hear us." Dylan clutched Holly's bracelet in his hand and fought the cold pit in his stomach he felt growing by the second. "Perhaps," agreed Laurel in a doubtful voice. Neither of them mentioned out loud that Vernon had definitely been at the tree the last time they saw him, and Dylan hadn't heard a car door open. The car was as empty as he expected it, but Dylan hadn't known where else to look. The neighborhood was quiet, with neatly trimmed lawns and no real hiding places. "Vernon!" he heard Laurel call out hopefully when she reached the tree. Laurel looked up into the tree. Then she turned and looked helplessly at Dylan. "He's gone," Laurel confirmed. Dylan nodded wordlessly while feeling physically ill. Both their children were inexplicably gone. "Harry and his people," began Laurel tentatively. "They'd have no reason to take Vernon, too, would they?" "No," agreed Dylan heavily. "They wouldn't. The wizards had always ignored him. Holly they might want, but never Vernon. So, where are they?" "I don't know," Dylan confessed. He was at a loss what to do next to find them, and certain something horrible had happened. Well, they can't have just gone into thin air, insisted Laurel stubbornly. She obviously knew nothing about wizards and their ways. There's got to be a clue somewhere. Laurel started pacing around with her eyes fixed on the ground. Dylan just stood there, clutching Holly's bracelet. That's right, Laurel exclaimed suddenly. Vernon was talking about something he found in the tree. She turned her attention to the tree. It was an older tree, one that had been there ever since Dylan could remember. Look, Laurel exclaimed, pointing at something in the trunk. There was something in the tree. If there is, Dylan conceded, leaving the car to join Laurel and take a look. It was nothing either of us put there. Of that I am certain. Sure enough, there was a heart-shaped item in the tree. Dad would have split a gasket if he ever saw this, commented Dylan dryly as he reached up and brushed it off so the lettering was easier to read. Dylan could just barely read the words, Harry Potter, Ginny Weasley, and Tom Riddle, now and forever, scratched on the metal. Once brushed, the metal seemed to gleam like a mirror, and he could see Laurel's green eyes reflect weirdly in its surface. Without a word, Laurel reached out and touched it. No, Laurel exclaimed suddenly as she removed her finger. Oh, no, she said in a panic, opening her purse and digging through its contents. What? Asked Dylan in alarm as he watched Laurel bring out a small change bag. Laurel dropped her purse in her haste and opened the change bag. She removed a silver chain from the bag. Attached to it was a familiar pendant, Holly's health stone. Dylan knew Laurel kept it with her always, but never where Dylan would see it. He had made it clear he wanted none of that witchy stuff anywhere near. What? Asked Dylan again, now thoroughly alarmed. Laurel would have never let Dylan see the health stone or its hiding place, were it not a total emergency. Seeing Laurel's frantic face, Dylan looked with Laurel at the shiny surface of the pendant, now cradled in Laurel's hand. It sparkled and shined iridescent in the daylight. Oh, breathed Laurel in relief, a sentiment Dylan shared. At least she's all right. Yeah, agreed Dylan. But what about Vernon? Laurel shook her head helplessly as she folded her fingers over the pendant, hiding it, and dropped the bag to the ground next to her purse. They both knew the pendant said nothing about him. What is it? Dylan demanded again. What do you know? Those names, began Laurel while pacing back and forth. That plaque, the eyes. There was something like that at Holly's school, the first year. What makes you think so? Asked Dylan. The knot in his stomach tightened and twisted in apprehension. The health stone had changed from iridescent to a dark purple color, and Holly had nearly died at that school her first year. It was one of the reasons Dylan wanted to remove Holly from that school and its people. The place was just too dangerous. But they were nowhere near that school now. How could this be the same sort of thing? It was something she said, began Laurel, while still pacing. Somewhere in the middle of the story, Holly said she touched something that took her to this horrible room, and they were trapped inside when the room began to fall apart. Huge stones were falling everywhere. There are no rooms here, observed Dylan. No, agreed Laurel, but the thing she touched, I think it also said Harry Potter and Tom Riddle. So, Harry Potter lived here. But not Tom Riddle, continued Laurel. Holly said Tom Riddle was another name for that Voldemort guy. Dylan felt the blood drain from his face. No, he exclaimed, clutching the charm bracelet ever tighter in his hand. If Voldemort was involved, the situation was truly deadly. Why don't I know? He asked finally. Holly told me over Christmas, explained Laurel. I insisted. It was some crazy, whacked-out story that you'd never believe. I'm not sure I even believed it, but Holly assured me it would never happen again, so I put it out of my mind. Harry Potter's got to be told, Laurel added. Dylan shuddered at the mention of Harry's name. He wanted nothing to do with Harry and his lot, but he wanted his children back more. And if what Laurel said was true, then they did need Harry. The book, he asked faintly, meaning the one Cousin Harry had given Laurel so she could contact him. Dylan had wanted to get rid of the book, but Laurel refused. He knew she kept the book hidden somewhere in the house. I didn't bring the book, Laurel said in frustration. Why should I? She was right. There should have been no reason to bring the book. They were severing their ties with Harry. Who could have expected this? "Where is it?" asked Dylan resolutely while fishing out his car keys. "I'll go get it." "I'm coming with you," said Laurel, snatching up her purse quickly. "No," said Dylan. "I'll manage." "But that'll take hours to drive," protested Laurel. "You can't do it alone." "Can't be helped," said Dylan heavily while opening the car door. "You're right. Harry has to be contacted, and there's no other way." Dylan began mentally calculating the number of hours it would take to get back home. 4 at least, taking a direct route. More if he ran into traffic. Less if he sped and didn't get caught. Would he be in time? He had to try. "Someone has to stay here in case the kids show up, or to show Harry the tree," Dylan added. "So, where's the book?" "You should be here when your cousin arrives," insisted Laurel. "I'll drive. It would be easier than trying to explain to you where the book is." "No," said Dylan firmly, sliding behind the wheel. "You stay. This is my fault. I've got to fix it." And it was his fault the children were missing. Never return was what Harry's weird friends had told them. It's too dangerous. "Don't go back," said his parents. "No point in dredging up memories of that awful boy." But Dylan had insisted on coming anyway. If he had only listened to them, none of this would have happened. How could he have been so foolish as to risk his family's lives for a bit of sentimentality? "No, wait," said Laurel hopefully. "I've an idea." Dylan waited anxiously while Laurel dug around in her purse. She pulled out her cell phone. "I don't think Harry has a phone," he said, reminding Laurel. "I know," said Laurel, turning the phone on and dialing a number. "Hello?" she said over the phone. "I'd like information for Sudbury, please." "Who are you calling?" asked Dylan. Harry lived somewhere in London, not Sudbury. "Yes," Laurel said into the phone. "I'd like the number of Mr. and Mrs. Charles Smith, please. They live in Brunden." Laurel tipped her head to Dylan. "The Smiths should have a phone," she told them. Dylan knew the Smiths were not wizards, but their daughter Becky was. "Hopefully, they can contact Harry for us." Becky was Holly's best friend at that school. Laurel sent all their mail to the Smiths to be forwarded on to Holly, and Holly did the same in return. That ensured no owls would arrive at their house. "At least it's worth a try," Laurel added. "I hope they're listed," she muttered to herself worriedly. "What?" she asked suddenly into the phone. "Oh, what was that address?" Laurel dug into her purse and fished out a pen and a scrap of paper while listening. "Yes," she said with relief. "That's the one. Could you repeat that, please?" Laurel swiftly wrote some numbers on the paper. "Thank you," she said into the phone. Laurel pressed another button and then dialed again, using the number on the paper as reference. "Now," she said as she returned the phone to her ear, "let's hope someone is home." Dylan remained behind the wheel while he waited to see what happened. "Answer," muttered Laurel with the phone glued to her ear. Clearly she'd gotten a ringing tone. "Hello?" she said, straightening. "Is this Mrs. Smith?" There was a pause. Then, "It is?" said Laurel. "Well, this is Laurel Wycliffe. I know we've never met, but—" "What?" "Yes, Holly's mother," agreed Laurel in relief. "I need a favor," Laurel began. "A big one," she continued, without giving the Mrs. Smith a chance to respond. "Can you get hold of Harry Potter for us? It's an emergency." Laurel was quiet, listening. Then she added, "The children, Holly and Vernon, are missing." "No, we haven't called the authorities because I don't think they can help. They just vanished right in front of us without a sound. Both of them," Laurel continued. "And there's this thing in the tree that says Tom Riddle." "Please," Laurel begged, "could you send Mr. Potter a message and tell him to call us? My number is—" Laurel reeled off a string of numbers, repeating them to make sure Mrs. Smith got them right. "Yes," breathed Laurel in relief. "Thank you," she added. "Thank you so much. We'll be waiting." Laurel ended the call and walked back to Dylan. "Mrs. Smith is going to send an owl right away," Laurel told him while pocketing the phone. "I don't know how long that will take, but it can't be as long as driving back to get the book." Dylan sighed and bowed his head in agreement. He reluctantly got out of the car and shut the car door. Laurel was probably right, but driving was almost easier than waiting and doing nothing. He longed to make the drive back anyway, just in case. Instead, he found a spot on the curb under the shade of the tree and sat down. "It'll be okay," Laurel said reassuringly as she sat down next to him. Dylan didn't answer. There was nothing he could say. He put his head in his hands. The charms from Holly's bracelet still clutched between his fingers, dug into his temple. How could he have screwed up so? Harry Potter sat at his desk in his house doing paperwork. Harry usually received quite a bit of mail every day. There were messages from Hogwarts, the ministry, announcements, invitations, requests for endorsements, personal letters, fan mail, hate mail, bills. Harry insisted on going through each and every piece personally. He heard a knock at the door of his office. That was odd. The door was always left open, but everyone knew Harry did not wish to be disturbed while working in the office. "Yes?" he asked, looking up at the source. Creature stood in the doorway. He held a slender roll of parchment in one hand. "Excuse me, master," said Creature, bowing low. His bat-like ears flapped slightly, and the silver locket hanging down his chest dangled back and forth. "This message just arrived for you. It's marked urgent, and the mistress thought you should have it right away." "Thank you," replied Harry, receiving the rolled parchment from Creature's hand. Creature bowed again and left. Harry studied the unopened roll thoughtfully. The outside contained the name Harry Potter and the word urgent written in red ink. There were no other markings to indicate its origins. "Albus said he recognized the owl," came the voice of Ginny. Harry looked up again. Ginny was standing in the doorway. Her long red hair hung loose about her face. She looked pale and a bit tired, but beautiful, as always. "He says it's Schuyler, Becky Smith's owl," Ginny added. Harry frowned. He knew Becky Smith was Holly's friend. The Smiths had never written him before. "Why would the Smiths write us?" Ginny asked, walking up to the desk. "If it has to do with the Wycliffes," she added curiously. She, of course, knew of the arrangement the Wycliffes had with the Smiths. Why didn't the Wycliffes write using the book? "I don't know," replied Harry quietly. "Shall we see?" He untied the red ribbon and unrolled the parchment. Harry could tell Ginny was dying with curiosity, but she would never open anything addressed to him without his prior consent. The message was brief and didn't take long to read. When he had finished, Harry stood quietly, trying to control his racing heart while keeping his face empty of expression. He rolled the parchment back up and tucked it into his robe before speaking. "The Smiths are passing along a message from Mrs. Wycliffe," he began carefully. "Oh?" "Apparently both Vernon and Holly have vanished, and the Wycliffes wanted me to know." "Vanished? Both of them?" "Yes," replied Harry, keeping his voice low so it wouldn't betray any emotions. Emotions wouldn't help them now. "And it seems there is something there bearing the name of Tom Riddle." "Tom!" Ginny's pale face drained of all color. "Vernon's got green eyes, doesn't he?" she added softly, no doubt drawing the same conclusion Harry had when he had read the message. And she instinctively looked down at the healthstone hanging from her neck, checking its shiny iridescent colors. "Yes," answered Harry quietly. "I'm going out to find a phone," he told her. "The Smiths have included a number to contact the Wycliffes." Ginny nodded. "What shall I do?" she whispered. Harry thought for a moment before answering. "Let the Smiths know we've received their message. No doubt they're worried. They're muggles," he added, explaining further, "and probably have little faith in their owl safely reaching us. Then get a hold of Ron and Hermione. See if they can be ready by the time I get back. This is one time I don't think I should try to take care of things alone." Laurel Wycliffe sat on the curb beside Dylan. It had been over an hour since she had called the Smiths. It was nearing lunchtime, but Laurel wasn't hungry. Periodically, she would check Holly's healthstone clutched in her hand for changes. So far, it had stayed a reassuring iridescence. More than ever, Laurel wished she had a similar stone for Vernon. She hoped he was okay, too. Out of the corner of her eye, Laurel could see Sasha sitting in the grass. The cat had changed her direction, so she was facing Laurel and Dylan, but otherwise hadn't moved from that same location since Holly had disappeared. Sasha must have been there that first time, Laurel thought with surprise. What had it been like? Laurel knew Holly had turned up missing at Hogwarts. She and Dylan had been informed of Holly's disappearance when they made inquiries after Holly's healthstone had turned dark, but no one provided details of the search that must have happened. How had Harry Potter connected Holly's disappearance with a tiny plaque? Holly said that Harry Potter had been there to pull them out at the inn. Would he get there in time again? Dylan hadn't said a word since he first sat on the curb. Holly's bracelet was still tightly clutched in his hand, and his hand still held his bowed head. Dylan had looked devastated when Laurel suggested the plaque in the tree might be like something that nearly killed Holly that first year at Hogwarts. He seemed to think this was somehow his entire fault. But how could that be? Neither Holly nor Harry had thought what had happened at school would ever happen again, and they should have known better than Dylan. The waiting seemed worse than before. That time Vernon had been fine. Dylan and Laurel only had a healthstone to know something was wrong in the first place, and had received immediate assurances people were looking for Holly. But the experience had been abstract, worrying and wondering and waiting at home. This time there was no one looking for the children. It was all very real and right in front of them. This time both Holly and Vernon could die. Suddenly, the loud blaring noise of her ringing cell phone interrupted the quiet of the neighborhood. Dylan started visibly at its sound, and Laurel nearly dropped the phone she already so anxiously clutched in her rush to answer it. "Yes?" she answered hopefully. "Where are you?" came the familiar voice of Harry Potter, without any preliminaries. Began Laurel, flustered. The question caught her by surprise. She expected to provide some sort of explanation first. Of course, Laurel was glad she didn't have to, but still. Why hadn't she thought to be ready with stuff like that? "It's, number 4 something," Laurel began uncertainly. She glanced quickly up the street, looking for some sort of a name, while trying to remember what town they were in. "We're outside our old home on Privet Drive," shouted Dylan over Laurel's ear into the phone. "We'll be right there," came the response, before Laurel had time to repeat Dylan's words. Then the phone disconnected. Laurel stared in disbelief at the cell phone in her hand. The conversation had been so brief, she scarce believed it had happened. "He says they're coming," Laurel told Dylan. His shoulders and upper body moved up and down in acknowledgement, while he kept his head buried in his hands. "But he didn't say when," Laurel added as she put her phone away. She wondered where Harry was when he called, and how long it would take to get here. Almost immediately, several loud cracks sounded from behind her. Laurel twisted in surprise at the sound and looked. She saw 4 people suddenly standing on the lawn. 2 she recognized, Harry Potter and his wife, Ginny. They stood nearest to her and wore regular-looking casual-type clothing. The other 2 people, a tall man with red hair and a woman with long red-brown hair, wore black robes over their clothing that looked straight out of a university graduation ceremony. Each of the 4 people carried a stick in one hand. "Wands?" Laurel hastily stood up to greet the 4 as they walked towards her. "Mrs. Wycliffe," began Harry Potter, without any preamble, coming to a halt after he put his wand somewhere out of sight. "You remember my wife, Ginny?" Laurel nodded. Ginny gave a faint smile by way of greeting while she tucked her wand out of sight. Hanging prominently around her neck was a stylized silver oval pendant. Laurel recognized the shimmer, identifying it as a healthstone, similar to the one she clutched in her own hand, except Ginny's pendant was divided into 3 segments, looking much like an ancient peace symbol. "These are my friends, Ron," Harry said, pointing to the red-haired man, who nodded his head towards Laurel briefly. He was putting his wand away, too. "And Hermione Weasley." Hermione smiled and said, "It's good to meet you." Then she added, "I'll take care of the wards, Harry." "Okay," Harry said, nodding absently, as Hermione walked off while still holding her wand out. Laurel didn't have time to wonder what a ward was, because Harry was again talking to her. "Where is it?" he asked bluntly. "What? It took a few seconds for Laurel to figure out what Harry meant. "Oh, the thing with Tom Riddle's name?" Harry nodded gravely. "It's on the tree over there," Laurel pointed. "I'll show you if you like." "Yes, please. Not so fast, mate," said Ron, stepping forward and placing a restraining hand on Harry's shoulder. "If that's what we think it is, we don't want you anywhere near it, Harry. "You stay here," he told Harry. "Jen and I will go take a look." Harry looked ready to object, but instead he merely nodded his head and took a step backwards. "What we think it is?" thought Laurel in confusion. "What is it?" She had touched it and nothing happened, but Holly had indicated one had to be related to Harry Potter for it, whatever it was, to work. Vernon was related to Harry. Vernon must have touched it and gotten transported to that room. Hence, he vanished. Harry clearly hadn't touched it, but wouldn't touching it get him to the room where he could rescue Vernon? So why didn't they want him near it? But then Holly hadn't touched it, and she had vanished too. What did that mean? There would be time for questions later, Laurel decided, when her children were back. "Mrs. Wycliffe, ma'am," began Ron politely, "would you take us to the tree, please?" Laurel nodded. Ron's black robe was a bit disconcerting, but otherwise he seemed rather normal. "Yes, of course," she said. "It's this way." And she started towards the tree. Once she saw Ron and Ginny stand together, there was no question in Laurel's mind who the Ginny Weasley was referred to on the plaque. Ginny and Ron were clearly related, most likely brother and sister. They didn't seem to think the plaque was a danger to her, pondered Laurel as she walked. So how was Ginny involved in all this?